With that, we bring in one of the best in the business, the play-by-play voice of West Virginia football and basketball, Tony Caridi. My friend, welcome. Great to have you back.
Hi, Steve. How are you, buddy?
Doing great. Long time no talk. What is it, Friday?
Yeah, we got you on this past week to get your insight to what's going on as we get ready to do this thing, huh? Ready to go again.
Yeah. So let's talk about the general atmosphere surrounding this game as a lead-up. Pitt, obviously, the backyard brawl is very special. Is there anything in the Big 12 that approaches in the fans' minds anything of a backyard brawl or a Penn State being there?
No, not really, Steve. I'm just trying to think out loud. Nothing really has taken, and it's a good question. I think sometimes in order to develop a rivalry, as weird as this sounds, like something out of character has to happen, i.e. A bad call, or, hey, this team was given a fifth down and you lost the game, or a fight, or something weird, right? Yeah. And I think that's what builds those kinds of situations, and certainly the backyard brawl for West Virginia and Pitt have had a litany of those types of things which increase the intensity of it. So, no, I think that this game, its uniqueness is that the last time Penn State was here was 92, which is a long time ago, obviously. And I think that since the two teams played so many times, 60 meetings over the course of the many years, that, it's a game that builds excitement. Then you just throw in the mere fact that it's a season opener and everyone is, amped up for a season opener, and West Virginia's coming off a 9-win season. So I think that kind of paints the picture to where we're going this week.
Garrett Green is a player that plays with a lot of guts. He's very talented, but he's also got a lot of guts. Where has he improved in your eyes?
I think it's a good question. I think when we went up there last year, Steve, really the first true road start for him, and to go into that atmosphere, there's a lot going on, obviously, and I think where he has improved is being judicious with the ball. If you take a look, he only threw 4 interceptions in all of last season. He's really a statistical anomaly if you take a look at it. He had higher success throwing the deep ball than he did the short range and the mid-range pass a year ago, and really throws a beautiful deep ball. And so I think going into this season, he's much more confident in the short pass game, the intermediate passing game. And then to add to that, I think he just feels really good about what he can do using his legs. He's a top-end speed guy and can get out of the pocket. He can extend drives. That's really something that WVU did not have in Neil Brown's first 4 seasons. We did not have a quarterback that could make plays with his legs. And that is problematic in today's football. And so he gives them that ability to make a play when a play isn't there. And I think that he'll go into this season feeling better about his arm and knowing that when he needs to go, he can go and make a play.
The running game, the number of times in the offseason that Jack Ham and I have talked about C.J. Donaldson is more than I think you'd realize. So the Donaldson component, but then add in what Jaheim White did in the last half of last season that gave West Virginia a different dynamic.
So that's a great point, because a year ago, Jaheim was not ready to play in this game. They just didn't trust him enough. And as a result of that, he didn't get a single carry. And so it was on C.J. Donaldson. So real quick story, just for Penn State fans that don't follow, obviously, on a week-to-week basis as far as what goes on here. So Donaldson converts from a tight end to a running back as a true freshman and has a really, really big-time season. Mm-hmm. And so everyone had high expectations for him last year. And he had a shoulder which nagged him the entire season. It could have been operated on in the summer of his freshman year, but he'd already broken his leg, so he didn't want to have 2 surgeries. So he nurses that thing. So he was okay, but by his own admittance, it was a disappointing year for him. Here comes Jaheim White, about 4 games into the season, and he explodes. And he starts doing the things where the coaches can trust him to play. And he ended the season just really super red hot. So that gives you, going into this year now, a really unique combination. You've got a small-built running back in Jaheim White who has the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, and he's got speed to break away from people. And then you add in a healthy C.J. Donaldson who did have that shoulder repaired at the end of last season. He didn't play in our bowl game, and he's good to go. So I'm interested, what difference does a Jaheim White make in this game on Saturday, and then what does a healthy C.J. Donaldson look like?
Defensively, the team does have multiple transfers, and it seems like there are a group of them on defense. How interested are you, Tony, to see how they mesh together on defense, especially the transfers in the secondary?
Super interested. I think that's a whole component of the whole season, to be quite honest with you, Steve. We've got a Big Ten transfer in Garnett Hollis, who was a corner at Northwestern, and he'll start at one spot.
Yep.
We have another corner who's going to start by the name of Aiden Garnes, who we played against last year when he was at Duquesne. And, in fact, he had a pick in our game against Duquesne, which made West Virginia coaches kind of raise an eyebrow. But he became a heavily sought-after corner when he put his name into the portal. And he's interesting. And so they feel, and this is kind of wild, neither of those two have started yet at WVU, but Neil has said that he's better at corner now than he was a year ago. But it's also a concern. Same situation at safety. You've got some new bodies out there, and you're hoping that they mesh. You go back this past weekend and take a look at Florida State and Georgia Tech, and Florida State had a bunch of really super talented players, but they weren't gelled yet because they came in from different places. And as a result of that, sometimes the continuity and the consistency can beat the talent. And I think overall, West Virginia, especially offensively, returns intact. There's a couple sprinkles of salt that they've added in transfers. But defensively, D-line, solid, good, returning guys, linebackers, guys who have taken a lot of snaps. But that back half of that defense, those safeties and the corners, if you're a Mountaineer fan, you've got a hope, but you don't know exactly what it's going to look like right now.
Yeah, it's not as if, Penn State's faced Jaheim Joseph before. They faced Hollis before. Conversely, let's get into this interesting dynamic. If there's any offensive coordinator you're going to go up against that knows West Virginia, it's going to be Andy Koltanicki. Conversely, if there's any team that you're going to play in the opener that knows Andy Koltanicki, it's West Virginia because of the Big 12. What are your thoughts on that dynamic?
Well, add another layer to that one. Yeah. Go back to Koltanicki at Buffalo.
Yeah, no, he talked to me about this.
Faced him when he was at Troy in a bowl game. And Neil, during his press conference this afternoon, said, I called my agents when we had played those guys. And he said, hey, you need to take a look at this guy at Buffalo because he runs really good stuff. Yep. And Steve, in coaching circles, whether it's football or basketball, when you say, hey, that guy runs really good stuff, like that's the ultimate tip of the cap of respect from one coach to another. So they're familiar with him. I mean, they've broken down. In fact, Neil today during his press conference talked about how Koltanicki has had past quarterbacks that body-wise and arm strength-wise were similar to Drew Aller. Yeah. And so they've gone all the way back, and they're looking at that. And that's part of the deal. And that's one of the areas that, everyone, I think, is interested. Penn State fans are interested to see what their new coordinators change and do this season. And then, obviously, West Virginia is also, intimately wondering out loud what their presence will do, in Saturday's game.
Neil Brown, you brought up his name. A year ago, coming into the Penn State game, some people were wondering if West Virginia didn't have the season they had hoped for, that it would be trouble. They ended up going 9-4, and the Houston game had to be crushing for you to call the end of that. I'm still in shock over that one. Neil Brown survives all of this. What has allowed Neil Brown to be a survivor?
Well, several things. I think, one, he's truly a good person, and I think that everyone around him that deals with him realize that. Two, I think the roster that he inherited from the previous staff was as low on talent as I've ever seen. And I've been here. This will be my 41st season. And each coach, from Don Nealon to Rich Rodriguez to Bill Stewart to Dana Holgerson, each inherited a minimum of 8 players on the roster that they inherited that went on to play in the NFL. Neil Brown inherited 1, and we just were out of players. The talent wasn't there. Throw in COVID, throw in the genesis of the transfer portal and NIL, and it took longer than anticipated and expected to get into this new world. And I think for the very first time in his 6 seasons now, that you go in to every single Saturday this season, and you will be a competitive football team. You've refilled the cupboard with the personnel that you need, that every Saturday you'll compete. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate to every Saturday you're going to win, but we've been playing with one arm behind our back here for about the last 4.5 seasons. It really wasn't until the second part of last year where we got back to where we needed to be. And so I think those are the reasons why, if you were just looking at it, not without your heart, but just looking at it, as to what this dude is about and what he was able to do, you say, keep him going. So I was absolutely thrilled the season that they had, because as you indicated, if it didn't go well, if that thing was about 6 wins last year, he probably isn't here.
Right. For you, Penn State fans haven't been to Mountaineer Field since 1992. You get the best seat in the house every week. To you, what makes that place special?
I think there is an inherent passion for this team that is different than in most places, and I say that in this regard. Firstly, we're a really small state, 1.8 million people, and there are 55 counties in West Virginia, and every county, in some way, shape, or form, has a commitment to WVU, whether they went to school here, their family went to school here, whatever it might be. The fact that there are no professional teams in this state makes this the professional team. And so the ebbs and the flows, the highs and the lows, truly are felt by the entire state in our sports, in football and basketball, and really in all sports. And so that's what makes it different. So when those people come in, when Mountaineer Nation comes into the stadium, like the cliches, you're the 12th man, you're the 12th person.
Yeah.
Like they truly do believe, like, I got to do something here. I got to make a difference in this game. And I think that when that scenario is put in front of them, they do their part. And I think it'll be on full display on Saturday. The perfect world would have been we play this thing at 7:30. And then, it would have been even more electric under darkness. But I don't think there's any question that this thing, even though it's a noon start, it will be extremely intense and extremely emotional, really, from pregame warm-ups. And so I think it's a classic, kind of what you hope for in college football.
And going back to being around West Virginia myself in the 80s, it was always a thought process, not in football, but this was more of a basketball thing. Can't be in the Atlantic 10, we got to be in the Metro. Can't, or if we're not in the Atlantic 10, you know what I'm doing. I'm not speaking out of turn here. I think my quotes are pretty close, as you know. Now the landing spot was the Big 12. Probably maybe the ideal landing spot's the ACC, but that's another discussion. What have the fans thought of the Big 12 as a football, basketball landing spot? And with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, what do they think about the future of it?
I'll answer the second part first. The future of it's really strong because they went out there and they just built their numbers to 16. And so it's hard to blow up a 16-team league. And I think that you were fragile, obviously, if it would have been, if you're at 10 or 12 and you lose 3 or 4, then you're in a difficult situation. So from that regard, they feel comfortable that they're in a position of, okay, we're strong. The other aspect of it is, and I've said this so many times when I talk to Mountaineer fans across the state, the only bad thing about this league, the only bad thing, is the geography. Mm-hmm. That's the only bad thing. Yeah. As far as being in a conference with similar institutions that have similar missions. A lot of state land-grant institutions are in the Big 12 Conference. That's who we are. And so geographically, while you might not think, West Virginia and Kansas State have similarities, like their fans are our fans. Oklahoma State's fans, Iowa State's fans, Texas Tech fans. You can put them all together. It's the same deal. But unfortunately, up until Cincinnati and UCF came in last year, you just can't get to the games like you used to be able to. And our fans love to go to the Pitt game, love to go to the Penn State game, love to go to Rutgers, love to go to Syracuse, love to go to It was easy. That's the way that it should be.
Right.
And that's an entirely different story and show that we could do one day, Steve, about how that Eastern League, what would have happened if Pitt and Penn State could have come to an accord. And, and who knows nowadays in this world, but it would have been great to see had we gone off and done that thing. But regardless, it is what it is. And I think that while there isn't any great history or tradition, this will be year 13 for us in this conference. It's a good league and it's good quality competition.
Yeah, I could do that show with you because I actually did a series of interviews with Joe in 1981 about attempting to form that. And then the subsequent interview about the disappointment on his part, it didn't happen. So I could do that show if you wanted with some information behind it.
Let me ask you this: Did he finger Pitt?
It was starting with more Syracuse, with Jay Crothamel, and Boston College. And I'm trying to remember Boston College's AD at the time. Jay Crothamel was the AD at Syracuse.
Oh, yeah.
And they were the ones that talked to Pitt about, hey, why don't you just join us in the Big East? And then the Big East, Dave Gavitt met with Joe at Bradley International Airport in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, to talk about maybe Penn State getting into the Big East for basketball. And the no votes ended up being St. John's, Villanova, Seton Hall, and Georgetown.
Stunning, right?
Yeah, Providence was the only basketball-only school that voted yes. But they couldn't have more than 3 no votes. And they got 4. And that's what kept them out. And so it's a long story behind it. But he thought he had it. He thought he had Maryland in it. He thought he had the Fiesta Bowl lined up as an automatic bid. There are a lot of things that he had put a lot of work in trying to check each box as he went along. And he thought he had it. But it was like that wasn't so much him talking about Pitt. He was more angry that Syracuse and BC worked on Pitt to go to the Big East and open the door there than it was Pitt just bagging it. He was more in the Syracuse direction than BC. So.
And isn't that ironic that those two schools are the ones that blew up the Big East because they took off to go to the ACC?
Right, exactly. And then we're going to see what's going to happen with UConn basketball because it doesn't sound like it's a football move.
That's ridiculous. That's a bad. I'm praying that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I know. I understand. And look, if you're going to join a conference, you join it for the whole thing. Okay?
Yeah.
And the reason that UConn's not in the ACC is Boston College.
Sure.
Yeah. Can't wait to see you Saturday. We'll talk off the air for a little bit about a couple things. And
sure.
We'll go from there because I think I saw a request that, can we talk?
Yeah, all I yearn is back to the old days. Can I get a depth chart? It's just a guy looking for a depth chart.
We'll do that. Tony, thanks so much. I'll see you Saturday. We'll talk here shortly.
Thanks, buddy. Take care, Steve.
You bet. Tony Caridi, the great play-by-play voice of West Virginia football, basketball. New book about the Pittsburgh Steelers, looking at the 2008 season in a team that gave up 223 points, led by coordinator Dick LeBeau. George Von Benko penned the book. George, welcome to the show.
Steve, great to be on with you. We're very excited about the book. It was released on July the 9th, and it is doing so well that Triumph Books has already committed to a second printing of the book.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. That's really great news. So let's start with this. Why did you pick this topic of Dick LeBeau and the 2008 Steelers defense?
Actually, he picked us.
Okay.
Dick had this on his mind for some time because he always believed that that 2008 Steeler defense never got its just due. He felt it was one of the great defenses in NFL history, and certainly the numbers back that up. So he had this on his mind for some time. He had accumulated a lot of information, all of the game films from all of those games, the 19 games from that season, all of the stats, and he started to look at writing the book, and he selected Scott Brown, who was a former beat writer covering the Steelers back then, and of course me, to co-author the book with him, he wanted it to be completely about the 2008 defense. We had to convince him a little bit that, yes, the bulk of the book will be about that season and that defense, but we can't overlook 59 years in the National Football League as a player and a coach. Steve, that will never, ever happen again. So we had to put some things about Dick LeBeau and his career in the book. He didn't want to do it, but finally acquiesced to our demands, and so there's some stuff on LeBeau and his career with the Lions and his time when he played for the Buckeyes at Ohio State. Some great sidebars on that, and of course the book about the 2008 Steelers. The 19 chapters are the 19 games of that season going into the final game, which was the Super Bowl.
What did you learn about Dick LeBeau, the man, that you did not know before?
Well, he is just unbelievable in this respect. I've been around football a very, very long time. My first year covering the Steelers was actually Chuck Noll's first year, 1969. And in that period of being around, particularly pro football and college football an awful lot, I have never, ever met a coach as revered by his players as LeBeau was. It just came through, and I just couldn't believe the way they felt about him as a coach and as a person. Right on the cover of the book, there's a quote from James Farrier, who was his middle linebacker, and the quote was, "Unlike any coach I've ever met." And that struck me. But then when you dig deeper into LeBeau, people forget, Steve, what a great player he was in his own right.
That's right.
62 career interceptions, which is seventh or eighth still on the all-time interception list. And he was just a great, great player in his own right. And a lot of people don't know that. And then the stories that came out of Ohio State, the time he was at Ohio State was a great period, Steve. They won the national championship in '57, and there were great football players there. But he was in school with Jerry Lucas, John Havlicek, Larry Siegfried, Frank Howard, the baseball player, was a center on that team. Bobby Knight was on that team, and Knight and he became great friends. And then two other classmates of his that people didn't realize were Jack Nicklaus and Tom Weiskopf.
Yeah, no, I was over at we had the golf outing this year at Ohio State. I saw all that. He's like, okay, here's Nicklaus's scorecard. Right, under glass from the Masters in '86 in the final round. Like, okay, very nice.
Well, one of the funny stories of the sidebar is I interviewed Knight quite some time ago before he passed away, and Dick remained in contact with him till the end, even though he had deteriorated and had dementia. He called Bobby quite a bit, talked to him, but he told me the story about Knight, and it sort of tracks. Knight was always bugging LeBeau. He said, "Take me over. I want to visit with Coach Hayes." He always was bugging him to take him over to visit with Coach Hayes. And if you think about the two personalities, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, to a point. To a point. Sometimes you can butt heads with people if you have too similar personality. But sure, I mean, you also want to learn from people who are leaders. That's why you'll find coaches today, they'll read leadership books, and it's not just leadership books when it comes to other coaches. For example, Joe would read Churchill. He read Harry Truman. People like that. Those are some of the books he would read, Leaders Under Crisis, and how they handled it. So, yeah, I can completely understand that. James Harrison had a phenomenal year. As an undrafted player, he rises to the top of the defensive ladder. What, for Dick LeBeau, James Harrison to him meant what?
It meant fighting for a player that he believed in, because he was cut several times, and before he had that run when he really turned into the defensive player he was very close to being cut by the Steelers again, and LeBeau fought for him, and that's what and to this day Harrison still talks about that LeBeau believed in him, and he became the player he became. The interesting part of the book too, when you look at all the players that contributed to the book, James Harrison and Troy Polamalu thought enough of it to write the foreword for the book.
Right. Which then brings us to Polamalu. Every defensive coordinator loves to have a chess piece that the opposition needs to find on every snap. To Dick LeBeau, what did Troy Polamalu mean to him?
He used him like a Swiss Army knife. He could do so many things. And you must remember, Troy was drafted the year before LeBeau came back to be the defensive coordinator. And many people in Pittsburgh viewed him as a bust. He had a very subpar rookie year, didn't get an awful lot of playing time. And Polamalu says to this day that it is no surprise to him that his career took off after Dick LeBeau became the defensive coordinator. And the thing that Polamalu impressed upon me is how much he put on his shoulders. Every player on that defense had to learn their role. Troy had to know what everybody else's role was. He said, not only did I have to know what I was supposed to do, I had to know what everybody else was supposed to do on that defense. And that's why Coach LeBeau spent so much time with me, and I was in the film room with him, and that gave him the leeway to do what he did, because a lot of times Troy would freelance, and LeBeau gave him that opportunity. Of course, it really helped, and it comes through in the book, that he had Ryan Clark back there to cover up if there were any mistakes made when he did gamble and see something and go to try and make a play. Ryan Clark was always in the right position, and LeBeau always told me, he says, it was so funny, I never saw them speak to each other on the field. They would just give each other a look. And a nod or just a look at each other, and they'd know what they were going to do. It was almost like it was telepathy between the two of them.
Well, if you ever talk with the legendary Harry Sinden, who was the coach of the Bruins, on Bobby Orr's famous goal where Noah Picard trips him and he flies through the air after scoring in overtime to win the Stanley Cup, Harry Sinden will tell you when Orr went to the net, the first thing he as a coach looked at was not Derek Sanderson passing it. He wanted to see if Eddie Westfall went back to the point to cover up for Orr not being there. Right? So that's how see coaches think that way. Ryan Clark was back there to cover up for Troy Polamalu.
And more often than not, which drove the other teams crazy, Polamalu would guess right.
Yeah, well, no.
He would see something,
he and instincts.
He would guess right, and he would blow up the play or do something spectacular. He was just a great player. But that defense was filled with great players. And it all started up front. If you hear Dick talk, the defense would not have been able to do what they did had it not been for a great nose guard by the name of Casey Hampton, who just gummed things up in the middle of the other team's offense. It took sometimes 2 or 3 players to block Hampton.
Well, that goes back to the Patriots, Vince Wilfork. It's the same thing, right? Most great defenses are built up the middle. All right. Was that always Dick LeBeau's philosophy of building up the middle, because it starts with Hampton, then it goes to Ferrier, then it goes back to the secondary?
Yes, and of course, we can't overlook James Ferrier, who Dick felt never got the credit he deserved. He was like another coach on the field. Ferrier was just a great leader for that defense, and did so many things. And then they had the two great outside linebackers in Harrison and then Lamar Woodley, who had come in and was actually in his rookie year of that year and did so much. But there were just so many great pieces to that defense, and Dick moved them around like chess pieces. But it was a pretty special bond between he and Paul Amalo. Paul Amalo, as Dick said, he used him like a Swiss Army knife.
What did Paul Amalo? Obviously Dick LeBeau meant a lot to his career, but as a man, what did Dick LeBeau mean to Troy Polamalu?
Well, you'll hear that from so many of the players. He taught them so much. And to a man, everybody I talked to from the defense, praised what he did as a coach and how they were put in a position to succeed by LeBeau. But they talked about the fact that it was more than just them as players. He cared about them as people and about their families. And, he was a father figure to many of the guys on that defense, and it continues to this day. We kicked off the book at the Western Pennsylvania Sports Museum, the Heinz History Center. We had a Q&A session down there on a Sunday, July the 14th, with Coach LeBeau, Scott Brown, and I. And then we had four players who came to participate in the Q&A session with the fans: Casey Hampton, Brett Kiesel, Ike Taylor, and Chris Hoke. And it was just a marvelous get-together with the fans. Over 400 people showed up. But one of the things that happened late in the talk we had with the fans is a lady got up and said, "I've heard so much about you reciting the night before Christmas to your players around Christmas time." And she said, "Would you give us a snippet of that?" And Casey looks at me and says, "He's just going to do a little bit, right?" Dick got up and did the whole thing verbatim and brought the house down.
The Super Bowl win over Arizona ended up being a wild affair where the Steelers had zero control over Larry Fitzgerald. Sorry, just a fact. But James Harrison had the 99-yard interception return, which took about 4.5 minutes to return. What does Dick recollect about that play at the end of the first half?
Harrison saw something. He was not supposed to be in that position, but he saw something, and he moved over to that position. Warner didn't see him, threw it right to him. But the interesting thing about the return was LeBeau had been on the defense that week in practice about if there is a turnover, you have to turn immediately. And he stressed it time and time again, from a defensive player to an offensive player, and lay a hat on somebody and start blocking. And that was stressed in practice during the week. The players remembered it. In fact, they got to the point where everything that was a turnover in practice, they were running back all the way and never stopping. And that led to the return. Everybody got a hat on somebody except Deshae Townsend, who was on the other side of the defense and then finally caught up to the play. But one of the funny things is Ike Taylor was yelling for James to give him the ball. Mm-hmm. And James didn't give it. And Dick wanted him to get down. I was yelling at, we had the lead. We still had a 3-point lead. That was right at the end. Yeah. I didn't want anything to happen and lose the ball again. I was telling James to get down, and instead he was running down the field, and finally I'm to the point where go. And, it turned out to be one of the greatest plays in NFL history. But it was Harrison who actually was not in the position he was supposed to be in. He saw something and moved into that position.
Yeah, it's one of the slowest plays in NFL history, but yeah, it's a great play. So, come on, let's go here.
Well, he was completely out of gas when he got to the end zone.
Well, no, he got to the 30-yard line, his own 30-yard line. I went and got a sandwich, came back. When I got back, he was at the other 30. All right, so it just took a long time.
The other thing is, Dick, after they gave up the pass to Fitzgerald, which was a breakdown in the secondary, and Fitzgerald scored that touchdown, and the Cardinals had the lead. The defense had been so great all year, and Dick was fretting on the sidelines that we had played so well all year, and we're going to have a breakdown like that, and it's going to cost us the Super Bowl. And the byplay on the sidelines was the defense had really carried them all year, and Roethlisberger looked over and said, "Don't worry, I got this."
Yeah, because when they won Super Bowl 40, Roethlisberger was a caretaker in a lot of ways,
and then made that throw to Santonio Holmes to win the game. And then that's where the title comes from. Paraphrasing, Mike Tomlin looked at LeBeau and the defense and said, "You guys have been great all year. Now is the time to rise up and stop Warner and Fitzgerald and them. You have a chance to be legendary." That's where the title came from.
Right. Well, I mean, look, Roethlisberger had been a caretaker really in Super Bowl 40. But in 43, I mean, the defense played well, but Roethlisberger's the difference maker in the game because he made big plays when they needed it. What did the defensive guys think of the offense for the Steelers and of Roethlisberger?
Well, at the beginning of the year, the offense was very much a work in progress. And Dick had told the defense that you've got to hold the fort until the offense catches up. And that's what they did, and they put up great in all the categories. Dick had a list of like 11 categories that he wanted them to rise to the occasion. These categories, they were better in each one of those categories except one, and they were very close to the number that he had. And the fact that in 9 defensive categories they led the league, they were second in one. But he felt the defense was going to have to carry the load early until the offense caught up, and eventually they got better and better as the year went on. And by the time they reached the Super Bowl, they were hitting on all cylinders at that point. But there was never any finger pointing. That never happened with Dick and his defense. That you played as one, and he made that clear to everybody. We play as a team.
Yeah, well, fortunately, Roethlisberger and Santonio Holmes were there to prove that point. So, where can people get this book? Where are the outlets, and how can they order it?
You can order the book online at Amazon.com. It is in Barnes & Noble's bookstores all around the country and many different outlets. It's being sold on the Steelers website where they sell their merchandise. It's being sold at the Pro Football Hall of Fame website where they sell their merchandise. So there are plenty of outlets to pick up the book. And as I said, it's doing very, very well, and I'm just so pleased with the way it turned out. You know, one of the things that helps make books, too, is to have some good photographs in the book, and the Lions and the Steelers both gave us carte blanche for photos in the book, and there are some tremendous photos in the book.
George, congratulations on this. It's a tremendous project, and it sounds like a fascinating read that should be on a lot of tables. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, Steve. I really appreciate it.